The sky had no color anymore. Just a pall of bruised violet streaked with fire where orbital platforms fell. From the uppermost balconies of the Echo Citadel, the atmosphere shimmered with ionizing trails, decayed remnants of Virexis's final defense grid collapsing into embers. High above, the planetary rings that once crowned the capital with argent splendor now spiraled in ruin, fragmented by Tarkith impactors and bleeding debris into the stratosphere. Valia Thorn stood alone at the edge of the Seer Throne's pinnacle, her silhouette framed against the violence overhead. Her ceremonial veils had long since torn free, their fragments carried into the void on shrieking winds. The obsidian spires beneath her feet, once sanctified ground to generations of visionaries, bore scorch marks now, laced with cracks where heat had buckled the surface. All around her, the winds howled through sundered support arches and shattered halo arrays. The city below, the cradle city of Virexis, burned in layered concentric rings, each a failed defensive barrier. The outer habitats, once vibrant with harmonic spires and floating gardens, had collapsed beneath the Tarkith's initial onslaught. Bioluminescent vines, once part of the city's living architecture, now hung charred and dead, the buildings beneath them reduced to bone-hued rubble. The inner sanctums still resisted, but barely. Across the western horizon, a Tarkith hiveclaw breached the arc wards, a siege beast with limbs of serrated chitin and mouths that sang in mimicry of Velari voices. It cleaved through the fortress district like a living battering ram, disgorging soldiers that shimmered with bioengineered resilience. The skyport's upper towers fell next, reduced to molten glass as Tarkith bioplasma rained from orbit. Valia did not weep. That capacity had been removed generations ago. The Velari genome, curated, stabilized, perfected, had no need for such inefficiencies. And yet, her hands trembled against the beacon's interface cradle. 12 slender digits, pale and jointed in threes, hovered over the seal plate of the last taboo. She had been bred for foresight, sculpted in the crystal vats of High Aeon Temple, trained in prediction choruses, immersed in the rhythms of entropy. Yet she had never truly believed the prophecy etched beneath the throne. The final call will not be answered. It will be unleashed. There had been debates, philosophical, biological, moral, etched across generations. Elders warned that summoning Terrans would not save the Velari. It would erase what made them worth saving. Valia had echoed that belief once, before Virexis burned. Before she saw Tarkith devour children and rewrite them into crawling things that wept with Velari mouths. The beacon of Ashward had not been activated since the age of reforging. Not since the Second Exodus. Not since the Terran Accord had collapsed in fire and silence. Its purpose had become more myth than memory. A ceremonial relic, a symbol of restraint. Calling upon it had become synonymous with surrender. To summon the Deathworlders was to admit that all other paths had failed. In orbit, Tarkith nest vessels formed an eclipse. 6 massive sacks of living flesh webbed with ion spines drifted into high alignment. They birthed new horrors hourly, writhing drop pods flensed by heat shields and filled with acid-jawed infantry. One such vessel cracked open mid-descent, split by an overloaded Virexis rail cannon. The fragments fell burning through the upper atmosphere, but the swarm inside adapted even as they died, reshaping their descent into gliding motes that impacted with ruinous force. Valia keyed the first sequence. Ancient glyphs, Terran, not Velari, flared across the interface in crimson bursts. The symbols bit into her thoughts with alien rhythm. She flinched. Her ancestors had warned. The beacon did not ask. It demanded. It rewrote its summoners as easily as it signaled its kin. Obsidian panels unfolded like petals. A crown of black needles rose from the beacon's socket, carving a perfect circle into the storm-racked heavens. Sound bled away. Then came the pulse. Not light, not signal. Something colder. A tone. It lanced through space-time, bypassing every known relay system, skipping quantum anchors, ignoring all known protocols. Screamed not in words, but in intent. Carried no request. Only declaration. We call. Respond. Far above, in the silence of the void, Tarkith ships faltered mid-burn. Their collective awareness, fluid and distributed, shuddered. Somewhere deep within their hive cortex, a memory uncoiled. A warning left embedded in their genetic code since the devouring moons. A presence they had fled in another eon. And beyond the stars, in the old spaces where humanity had vanished, something ancient stirred. A relay station buried beneath the obsidian crust of Terminus Black, coded Aurora 6 by long-forgotten Terran cartographers, flared awake. It had not pulsed since Cycle 3125. Its internal AI parsed the call, verified the beacon signature, and initiated the Ashward response doctrine. One signal shot inward, toward the heart of Terran dead space. 211 hours later, the 7th Terran Armada received the call. They did not deliberate. There was no discussion. Admiral Holt Rain, sealed inside the command core of the dreadnought monolith, issued a single command. Course lock, Ashward beacon, full burn. No return. Across the fleet, engines ignited. Not conventional plasma or gravitic drives, those had been abandoned. Terran ships moved by dark fold. Space rippled around them as if flinching. The lead vanguard tore itself from real space, followed by 12 siege carriers, for planet crackers, and a veil of hunter-killer escorts that moved like a fluid stormfront. Their hulls bore no sigils. Their Vox arrays did not speak. They did not identify themselves. They were not coming to negotiate. They were coming to end. Back on Virexis, Valia remained as the last of the Citadel's outer defenses fell. Screams rose from the spiral stairwells. The sanctuary gates shuddered under biohydraulic battering rams. Her sentinels sealed the core archivum beneath her. Protocol demanded she descend into stasis. But she did not move. The beacon's petals closed, blackened by their own invocation. Valia's hands smoked where they touched the control spindle. She felt the nerve burn crawl up her forearms. She did not pull away. She remembered fragments of history, forbidden archives accessed only once. Terran war philosophies etched into alloy tablets, images of bone fields and glass planets, old words that refused translation. She had dismissed them as pre-exile myths. Now they felt like warnings. She looked up. The stars above blinked, one by one. Not extinguished, clouded. Something vast had begun crossing between them. In the last quiet seconds, she whispered, not in fear, but with the hollow resignation of a seer who finally understood the cost of her own foresight. "Forgive me," she said. "I have summoned monsters." And in the distance, beyond light and time, the monsters came. The void around the Ashward edge was never still. Here, the stars blinked not with warmth, but with warning ice-bright, sharp-edged. They marked the perimeter of something left alone, unclaimed, unspoken. Scattered among them hung remnants of humanity's old wars, fractured dreadnought hulls drifting in eternal decay, derelict orbital crucibles half-swallowed by gravity scars, defense moons whose cannon batteries still tracked the emptiness. Their sensor arrays long since fused into silence. This was not wilderness. It was aftermath. There were no trade lanes here. No embassies. No treaties. Only the silence where the Terran diaspora had gone to bury its rage. When the call came, it was not received, it was felt. Across the deep black, old sensors twisted inwards like exposed nerves. Cryptographic layers blinked open. Protocol stacks awakened, each older than the last, until the final command reached the monolithic AI codenamed Stratum, buried beneath the carbon crust of Warden's Maw. Stratum had no voice. It was not meant to reason or speak or question. It was a fuse, silent, waiting. It pulsed once through the subquantum lattice and humanity stirred. On the anode binary of Kessler's fall, the 7th Terran Armada broke formation. Ships the size of cities rotated their displacement lattices. Their hulls, sheathed in reactive alloys mined from neutron tomb worlds, flared against the Darfold surge. Each bore scars from extinction campaigns past, thermal scoring from Jovian siege moons, vent fractures from pulse mines, armor pitted by void edge weaponry. Names of colonies were etched into stripped hulls in negative space, removed, not forgotten. Some ships shimmered with radiation fields barely restrained. Others moved with the gravity of forgotten sins. The monolith sat at the center of it all, a pyramid of silent mass, 6 kilometers of interlocked hull segments and flexing graviton ribs. It bore no insignia. Only depth. Light did not reflect from its surface. It was designed not to be seen, but to be known. Within, Admiral Holt Rain awoke. Not as a man returns to consciousness, but as a verdict is handed down. His stasis shell hissed apart in concentric layers, spilling vapor and neural coolant into the command sanctum. Combat data rewrote his cortical baseline in waves, telemetry, threat modeling, planetary decay cycles. The signal burned through all of it. Velari beacon / Ashward protocol level 1. Response override, full burn / no return. He sat up slowly, the taste of cryometal on his tongue. Memory flickered. Not of people. Of sounds. The whine of orbital grinders. The silence that followed them. He stood. Status, Rain said. The AI chorus answered in perfect harmony. Fleet readiness, 94%. Ship integrity, 87%. Darfold vectors aligned. Clearance, total. He studied the fleet lattice. Thousands of lights, thousands of machines. None waited for orders. Only confirmation. In the galactic sprawl beyond, 1 point, pulse cold and white. Ashward beacon. He spoke only once more. Signal the fleet. We answer. Across the armada, chambers opened. Cryofields collapsed. Tactical crews aligned graviton rails and synchronized orbital descent vectors. Core AIs, silenced since the Ganymede suppression, flared back to life, consuming threat environments and casualty allowances with mechanical hunger. There were no honor ceremonies. No war cries. No last rites. They were not summoned for glory. They were summoned for subtraction. In Drop Crucible 1173X, buried beneath Vanguard Spear Tessalin, Cora 7 awoke. She came online in total stillness. No dreams. No warmth. Motion initiated. Joints locked and aligned. Armor began its metabolic response. Oxygenation scrubbers came online in her synthetic marrow. A single glyph burned across her sight, awaken. Her limbs extended as precision systems resynced. The crucible around her held no color, no ornament. Its walls bore chemical scars from prior engagements. Acid wash, melt-bore residue. She recognized each like old wounds. The embedded voice returned. Query, confirm operational state. Operational. Query, engage memory stream? A flicker. The Tarkith again. Mimicry laced with bone. That city full of stolen voices. Negative. She would remember them soon enough. Outside, the Tessalin fired its Darfold spires. Cora's crucible began its ignition sequence. Final instructions populated her vision. Cleansing priority. Type 7 infestation sieve mass integration. 84%. Irreversible sanction code. Omega-6 eligible for total burn. She tilted her head. Culling it would be. One by one, the Terran ships vanished into the dark. Not with flare. Not with distortion. With absence. The fold tore. They entered. The scene closed. 12 hours later, they emerged in system. The Velari star burned sick. Radiation halos surged in unnatural tides. Something in orbit shed spore veils into high atmosphere. Velari Prime, Virexis, was bloated with infestation. Half-living cities bled enzyme into drainage plains. Spire harvesters fed on the bones of ecological sanctuaries. Sensor data compiled a verdict. Planetary infection level, critical biosphere contamination, irrecoverable civilian structure continuity, null. Rain stood over the readings. His knuckles whitened. Not with rage. With memory. Years ago, on Eller's Reach, he delayed a burn by 3 hours. Long enough for the swarm to adapt. He hadn't made that mistake twice. Deploy. No alarms. No sirens. Just kinetic orchestration. Drop crucibles fired from 27 core ships. Mass driver shockwaves rattled orbital debris. Each crucible burned black as it fell. Above the outer rim, hundreds of black silhouettes eclipsed the stars. The Tarkith did not fire. They remembered. Somewhere inside the hive synapse, a ripple passed. An instinct unspoken. They are not coming to fight. They are coming to finish. In the crucible's descent, Cora 7 watched the atmosphere burn past. The spore sky parted. Final command came through. Begin planetary culling. Cora stepped forward as the hatch sheared open. She did not fall. She entered. And beneath the gas-veiled sky, the Deathworlders began. The Tarkith did not dream. They did not sleep. They did not remember. But in the deepest layers of their genetic recursion, buried beneath chemical instincts and replication directives, something shifted when the Terrans arrived. Not fear, there was no emotion as higher species knew it, but a kind of pattern collapse. A substructural rewiring. A collision with an ancient trauma. The swarm remembered only through extinction events. When memory could not be passed through drones or queens or spores, it encoded itself into base recursion, errors, forbidden mutations, silenced branches. In the Tarkith hive cortex, these were the null directions. Until now, they had never activated. Then came the signal. Then came the Deathworlders. The orbital hive cortex pulsed. It was not a ship, not a station. It was a brain the size of a continent, anchored in orbit by fused biomechanical chains that looped through gravitational wells. Biofilament tendrils twitched. Decision cortex realigned. The swarm slowed across all vectors. Drone generation paused. Adaptive responses ceased. The gestalt focused. Entire layers of external action ceased. Infallible as they were, the Tarkith did something they had never done. They watched. But something cracked. A ripple passed through the biolattice. A memory fragment misfired. A mimic-wire sang 2 notes out of sequence. Something in the swarm tried to speak and stuttered. Cora 7 landed on what had once been a plaza. Its name in Velari longscript was Ilasanver, the communion circle of wind and water. Its center held a great seer's bell tuned to planetary tidal harmonics. The bell still hung, but it breathed now. The plaza had been rewritten, recycled. Flesh clung to steel. Veins pulsed beneath shattered marble. The bell's metal had been eaten and replaced with neuroshell plating that responded to sound with echo mimicry. Cora heard her own steps repeated in reversed cadence. The ground under her flexed slightly. She moved carefully, every limb in kinetic sync with her armor's predictive engine. Microfilament tensionors adjusted with her stance. Atmospheric processors in her spinal ports filtered and parsed the rising humidity. Spore concentration spiked with each step. Her HUD mapped it in tendrils of red fog. The air was saturated. But she had been grown for this. Every breath she took was a weapon. A cluster of observation nodes blinked open ahead, small drone orifices sewn into the stone flesh walls. Transparent membranes quivered, trying to resolve her shape. Cora raised her forearm. A thin spike clicked outward. With a flick of her wrist, she fired the obelisk. It screamed upward, a lance of inverted plasma, core stabilized and silent until impact. The film above recoiled. A sheet of breathing fungus and filament nerves that had masqueraded as the plaza's overhead canopy now twisted, convulsed, and collapsed. It dropped onto the nearest arcology tower, shearing the upper 30 floors. Half a kilometer of structure toppled into its twin. The ground erupted with a sigh. Cora ducked under the shockwave as a sonic pulse cracked the perimeter. Something vast and liquid screamed within the ruin. She responded with a single kinetic dart, pinpointing the echo source. Silence followed. She moved again. Aboard the monolith, Admiral Rain stood within the command sanctum, surrounded by translucent fields of light. No traditional monitors. Only thought fabric, a responsive array that projected data in layers tuned to his cognitive rhythms. The planet unfolded around him. Hive structures pulsed with heat and motion. Orbital scans revealed nutrient flows, spore migrations, drone generation rates. Terran kill metrics overlaid in cold blue. Thousands of drop crucibles were already inside atmosphere. Dozens of squads had breached the surface sprawl. Each followed strict containment doctrine: no contact, no communication, no mercy. The Tarkith were adapting, but too slowly. Not because they lacked speed. Because they hesitated. Because they remembered. Every structure abandoned now was triage. Every retreat a test. The swarm had never encountered a threat it could not metabolize. Except once. The Terrans were not waging war. They were executing protocol. Rain stared at the command lattice. His fingers hovered over the glyphs. He exhaled slowly. He saw, for a moment, the scorched outline of Eller's Reach, the children stacked in rows, the breathless silence after planetary implosion. His jaw clenched. He forced the memory back down where it belonged. Expand perimeter vectors. Initiate planetary suppression. The monolith complied. Its ventral spine opened like a wound. From orbit, the Terran armada began its formal burn. Kinetic lances fired in silence. They were launched not from gunports, but from gravitic wells that collapsed local fields into focused acceleration. Each lance traveled at Mach 12 before atmospheric resistance even registered. They struck hive clusters, energy farms, nutrient collectors. Structures designed to reshape planets fell in seconds. Bloom shock eruptions cratered neural nets. Ion rivers, once repurposed Velari aquifers, vaporized. Forests regrown in organoplast sheaths boiled to ash. The fleet mapped every tremor, every movement. 9.3% of the biosphere ceased functional activity in 30 seconds. And still, the Tarkith did not scream. But one hive fractured. A peripheral relay node sang out of rhythm. The signal distorted, looped back. Inside the cortex, something shivered. Cora entered the throat of the hive. It had been a Velari subterranean rail network, fast transit tubes built into the bedrock, curved to match tectonic flow lines. The Tarkith had eaten it, repurposed it into a circulatory core. Walls pumped glucose vapor. Pseudopods twitched on nutrient rails. Every step triggered reflexive contractions as if the hive tried to digest her. Her armor countered automatically, sealing against the pressure. Deeper in, temperature dropped. Moisture crystallized in places. Bioluminescent threads of silicate mold lit the walls with pale green pulses. Movement ahead. She froze. Spores brushed her helmet. Her internal metrics read a flicker of pheromone resonance, targeting signals passed in nonverbal code. They knew she was here. A ripple passed through the tunnel. Not footsteps. Not speech. An intention. Drones formed from the shadows, unfolding from the wall itself. Their limbs were wrong. Angular, yet fluid. Asymmetrical. They mirrored her movements. Some wore her shape. They sang in fragments. We remember. Not flesh. Not code. Eller's reach. The burnt child. Cora activated the writ. Her armor flared. Subdermal blades surged to her forearms. Twin secondary limbs deployed from her spine, each tipped with vibrocutters tuned to hive nerve frequencies. The drones moved first. Cora stepped into them. Steel met nerve. Armor clashed with meat-grown exoskeletons. The tunnel screamed. She fought like a virus, moving through their ranks in silence, disabling, severing, deleting. Her strikes were not wild. They were surgical. Every motion a culling. One drone latched onto her flank, injecting microfilament neurotoxin. Her system flash-purged. Her counterblades severed its midline and burned the toxin sac. Another tried to speak. It used her voice. It begged. She crushed its skull. A flicker across her HUD. Node-class core nearby. Emission spike. In orbit, Rain's command lattice confirmed the signal. Cora had located a node-class neural stem. He tapped the command glyph. A warhead shunted into final position. His hand paused for half a second. He saw a burnt sky. Then he pressed. Fire the hammer. The sky cracked. A warhead fell from orbit, black, oblong, with no propulsion signature. It moved too fast for air to matter. At 31 meters above impact zone, it detonated. 0-point implosion. Vacuum collapse. Sound failed. Light died. 6 square kilometers vanished. When the silence ended, Cora stood at its edge. Her armor was cracked. Her left leg fractured. Her spine rig burned out. But she stood. Pain echoed like distant thunder. She took one step, then another. Inside her helmet, old memory stirred. A child's voice. A name she no longer remembered. It faded. She kept walking. Behind her, wind screamed through a wound in the planet. And deep below the crust, in hive cortex chambers older than light, the Tarkith screamed back. Not in fear. In memory. They called it the first reaping. Not in ceremony. Not in pride. Terran protocol did not allow for titles. The name came later, from the Velari who survived and from the scattered whispers of allied observers who watched a world unmake itself. It began at Grid Mark 13, one of the planetary resonance lines where the Tarkith had seeded a deep structure growth engine. The engine was not mechanical. It was a living tower, kilometers tall, folded in spirals and grown from planet-mined protein chains. It reshaped geology with root fangs and atmosphere pumps. It pulsed like a second heart beneath the planet's crust. It did not breathe. It inhaled. Until the colors arrived. Cora 7 was not among the initial strike teams. She had been rerouted to a medshell suspended in low orbit after the hammer strike. Her vitals had flatlined for 87 seconds. Her neural core had stabilized without failover. The damage to her body was classed as superficial muscle weave tear, subdermal blistering, partial loss of femur integrity. Her cognitive readouts showed no trauma. She sat within the shell, restrained only by magnetic grips at the ankles and backplate. Her body had been repaired, rebuilt. Her new spine rig still pulsed with heat from calibration. But she felt nothing. Not pain. Not hunger. Not dread. Just wait. Through the medshell's forward viewport, she watched. The culling began with rings of fire and steel. At Grid Mark 13, 9 color teams descended in atmospheric spears, drop crucibles reconfigured for breaching operations. Each team consisted of 6 Terran operatives clad in reinforced Type B suits, anti-mycelial, reinforced with toxin scrub circulatory plating. Their descent path was calculated to bypass known Tarkith aerial tendril arrays and impact directly at the root anchor of the engine. The structure itself loomed like a tower made of muscle and gristle, swaying gently under planetary tremor. Lattices of vascular fibers pulsed across its surface. The air nearby glowed faint green, bioluminescent aerosol mist from the organ pumps. The tower sang in low harmonics, vibrational pulses tuned to planetary lay stress. The Velari once harnessed these energies for geosympathetic architecture. Now it was Tarkith's song. The colors breached low through the root shell where the Tarkith had fused the old magrail tunnels with chitin shielding. Microbursts cracked the anchor membranes. Plasma ropes lashed open entry points. Then came the gas. Hyperdense neurotoxins mixed with aerosol nanite shears flooded the tower's interior. The toxin blend was coded to attach itself to Tarkith mitotic inhibitors, causing them to replicate endlessly until cell collapse. It did not work on organics. Only swarm grown. The engine screamed. Not audibly, but the surrounding area resonated with sudden magnetometric spikes. The pulse blanketed several Terran suits, overwhelming visual targeting for 0.12 seconds. The swarm attempted to scramble the color's command lattice. It failed. Terran combat systems were layered through quantum differential redundancy. When the swarm's pulse failed, the colors responded. They inverted the signal. Sent it back. The tower folded inward, imploding into itself like collapsing lungs. Kilometers of living tissue collapsed in waves. Outlying hive-thread support beams snapped, cascading failures along neural net channels. Nearby valleys of filament growth began to detach, vines convulsing, breaking. Two spore cities began to buckle. Not from the strike. From the loss of control. The hive had been centralized here. It had adapted into hierarchy. And now the spine had broken. From orbit, Admiral Holt Rain observed without expression. The planetary display bled red into the thought fabric, heat blooms, structural collapse indicators, biosignal discontinuities. A band of seismic feedback arced across the lower hemisphere. The swarm was pulling back, not dying, withdrawing, compressing. Their surface nodes had begun to retract biomass. Colony tendrils dissolved into slurry. Hive spires lowered into the crust like molted shells. Thermal readings showed mass being shifted beneath tectonic layers. It was not panic. It was preparation. The swarm had decided to wait them out. He turned to the comm lattice. Stage 3. Planetary cleanse. The command was relayed in silence. But as he watched the swarm data collapse, a flicker passed through him. If they survive us again, what will they become? Stage 3 was fire. Atmospheric igniters deployed in waves. Over 4,700 Lantern-class carriers descended through the high-altitude corridors left by prior orbital strikes. They resembled falling stars, burning black obelisks, tipped with dispersal pods. Each carried catalytic aerosol seeds. These were not weapons in the traditional sense. They were devourers. Hyperreactive molecular clouds that bonded with any Tarkith-derived protein. Once ignited, they released chain-resonant flame across any viable biosubstrate. Within 90 minutes, one-third of the northern hemisphere was aflame. The sky turned gray. Then orange. The wind changed. On the surface, fire fronts moved at 80 kilometers per hour. Entire spore fields ignited in lattice waves. Biodomes burst from internal overpressure. Organ trees, grown from stolen Velari flora, twisted in place before disintegrating. Each burning structure released memory smoke, encoded Tarkith pheromones. The swarm was trying to preserve its pattern. Even in death, it remembered. Terran systems intercepted the signals. Analyzed. Archived. Deleted. In memory crypts deep beneath Velari strongholds, the survivors watched the sky die. The young did not understand. The old remembered fragments. Some tried to explain. "They are saving us," a teacher whispered to the children, voice shaking. No one answered her. Cora Seven's medshell floated silently above the edge of the fire front. She watched as miles of landscape turned black. Her armor twitched along her forearms, bonding rituals not yet complete. Her spine rig pulsed. She remembered the way Eller's reach had fallen. Not in fire. In silence. There had been no flame. No screams. Only static. The flicker of lights across a child's face before they went out. The taste of carbon in the air. A medic drone hovered near. "You were cleared for redeployment." She did not respond. Then she stood. Far below, deep in the crust, the Tarkith changed. The brood cores were still intact, egg chambers the size of cities, laced in symbiotic fungus that fed off geothermal heat. Here, the swarm was no longer watching. It was regrowing. New drone types were grown in compressed gestation. The old forms had failed. The Deathworlders had evolved faster. The new ones were leaner, more adaptive. Their bone structure mirrored Terran outlines. Their nervous clusters were redundantly shielded. Their mimicry glands were reduced, too easily traced. Instead, they evolved silence. But the cortex did not command this. It merely observed. The drones were no longer listening. But the Terrans were not done. Orbit was quiet. But the drop lattice had been seeded again. This time with tectonic destabilizers. Thousands of them. Invisible to standard scan. Each no larger than a grain of rice. Each carried a chained singularity core locked in inert quantum state. They burrowed silently through the crust, slipping past seismic detection by skipping across gravitational harmonics. They waited. And Admiral Rain waited with them. Every breath of smoke across the scorched world brought the same question. Was it still worth saving? Was there still a shape beneath the ash that could one day speak, remember, rebuild? He watched the numbers cascade. Watched the swarm recede again. And slowly Rain turned to his command glyph. He did not press it. Not yet. But the moment came closer with every breath the planet dared take. The swarm did not speak. It never had. But now, for the first time in its long replication chain, it also did not obey. The cortex throbbed deep in the mantle layers, blind to half its brood nodes. Thought pulses echoed into silence. Drones failed to return. Evolutionary branches forked without orders. Substructures self-edited. Pattern drift accelerated. The Tarkith were fragmenting. Not dying. Not failing. Changing. Above, the surface burned. Smoldered. Choked. Clouds no longer formed naturally. They were pressed into shape by the magnetic turbulence of half-collapsed hive spires. What remained of the atmosphere shimmered with soot veils and refractive haze, distorting Terran optics even as they scanned for motion. Sensor arrays pinged static, pulsing against resistance fields the swarm had not installed but grown. Then came the reemergence. It was not coordinated. It did not resemble prior attacks. They came alone. In pairs. In shadows. The first drone emerged from beneath a shallow mire outside Observation Basin 7, where swarm tendrils had once rooted an entire colonial mind lattice. It was thin. Angular. Built more like a Terran than any Tarkith before. It moved on two legs. It had no visible weapons. But it looked upward. And blinked. Cora 7 had been assigned to Line Echo, one of the atmospheric perimeter bands meant to enclose the remaining contaminated basins. The role was surveillance. Hold. Observe. Engage only if necessary. She landed in silence, her drop crucible half-submerged in black soil and ash. For hours, there was nothing. Then came movement. First in the thermal range. Then infrared. Then direct line of sight. Shapes. Lean silhouettes, broken in outline but eerily symmetrical. They moved with jerking precision, not like animals, not like tools. Like sketches drawn from memory. She moved to intercept. The drones rose from the earth like recalled dreams. Their forms were sleek, lacking armor, but covered in ridged exofilament. Their heads had no visible eyes, only faint depressions where sensory clusters likely pulsed beneath. They came toward her in silence. Their limbs mimicked her posture, not in real time, but in predicted rhythm. Every step she took, they mirrored after a delay. As if remembering. The first drone lunged. She met it head-on. Her strike split it from clavicle to pelvis, a clean bifurcation. It did not bleed. It shattered. Bone fiber lattices crumbled like brittle glass. Its torso hissed with inertial gas, preserved atmosphere from a sealed internal cavity. Its expression never changed. The second came faster. Cora moved to parry, but it had already adjusted. Its angle of attack matched hers by 93%. Its feint was identical to her first recorded kill pattern during the siege of Vanter's Gate. She froze not in fear, but in recognition. This one had seen her. Not recently. Not in this war. From memory banks passed through swarm generations. It grinned. She severed its jaw, shattered its ribs, dropped it. But the echo stayed in her mind. She had just killed a reflection. Across the perimeter, swarm activity surged. Not in waves, but in precision. Terran squad deployments reported infiltration. False flag signals. Swarm drones wore fabricated IFF tags that mimicked Terran units. In one sector, a strike team was ambushed during a routine diagnostics relay by what they believed was backup. It wasn't. The entire squad was lost. No survivors. When Rain reviewed the footage, one drone used Terran command signals. Perfectly. Admiral Holt Rain stood in the monolith's forward sanctum. He did not blink as the report scrolled. 3 projection layers. One for losses. One for anomalies. One for pattern acceleration. They did not align. The swarm was no longer operating under known doctrinal adaptations. It had begun to improvise. Worse, its improvisation was recursive. He turned to the inner lattice. Deploy the judges. The judges had not been used in 69 planetary engagements. They were not soldiers. They were doctrines incarnate, constructed in orbital foundries beyond Mars, then buried in lunar vaults under no-fly sanctums. Each judge was a self-governing combat resolution AI encoded with laws of threat invalidation sealed in graviton-hardened shells. They required no authorization once deployed. Only a single directive. Erase all potential continuance. They dropped in 9 pods. Each was silent. Each landed at a different planetary node, magnetic polar caps, swarm convergence points, seismic cores. The planet felt their impact like cold thunder. The soil shuddered. Drones paused mid-motion. And then prosecution began. Cora saw one cross her sector. It stood 20 meters high, bipedal with 6 secondary limbs folded into armored slots. Its headless chassis scanned nothing. It did not acknowledge her. It walked through her cleared perimeter and entered a former Velari settlement now covered in regenerative spore mist. The judge paused. Sensors activated across a kilometer radius. It registered 13 anomalous shapes. 10 were inert. 3 moved. 1 moved like a child. 1 stepped forward and raised its hands. It mimicked surrender. The judge did not hesitate. A limb unfolded. The drone's head atomized mid-gesture. Cora watched the others fall. What followed was less a battle than a correction. The judge's limbs unfolded. Each strike was final. Not lethal, corrective. Structures dissolved from resonance dissonance. Drones dropped, intact but neutralized at the neural level. Cora watched it move on. It left no footprints. The swarm panicked. Cortex threads recoiled. Data silos were erased. Biochemical caches were incinerated by their own perimeter guards. One relay node issued contradictory orders: replicate, retreat, merge. Drones convulsed mid-motion. One turned on its sibling. Another collapsed. Entire hive sectors went dark. For the first time in swarm memory, flight was chosen over replication. 3 tunnels opened at the poles, slowly at first, then widening with continental pressure. These were not escape routes. They were spore gates evolved from tectonic ducts and magnetic field lines. Inside, larval banks, genetic libraries, and partial cortical memories were sealed into biomechanical sacs. They were not pods. They were seeds. Each was encoded with escape instinct. Launched by resonance geysers, giant volcanic eruptions timed to arc over gravitational boundaries. 216 spores launched. Terran interceptors destroyed 182. 34 made it out. Rain watched the last one leave the system. His hands did not twitch. His eyes did not move. But something in him shifted. He pressed the final glyph. Below, the tectonic destabilizers activated. Each sang in harmonic sequence. Then, one by one, they detonated, not explosively, but inversely. Gravity bled sideways. Fault lines opened across the lithosphere. Mountains fell inward. The crust folded. Continents collapsed. The swarm was undone. Its last thought was static. No mercy was given. And none was asked. The planet no longer moved. It groaned. Where once tectonic plates danced beneath flowering forests and oceans threaded with crystalline salt, there was now only subsidence and silence. Entire landmasses had folded into themselves like broken limbs, pressure-locked and lifeless. Mountain ranges slouched into magma-slick trenches. Riverbeds glinted with dusted glass, not water. No birds. No storms. No Tarkith. Ash covered the wound like a scab, gray, granular, shifting in slow spirals as wind patterns re-established without guidance. The sun broke through only in fractured beams. The sky was colorless. In orbit, the Terran monolith remained still. No transmissions. No departure. It simply watched. Cora, 7, walked alone. Her armor bore deep heat scoring and micro-fractures across the knee joints. Her spine rig was throttled to 40% output. The medics had cleared her for stasis. She had refused. No override was attempted. Beneath her feet, the soil crunched. It was no longer dirt. It was fused biological ash, bone fragments, hive secretion calcified by orbital fire. Every footfall sounded like glass grinding under pressure. She moved without destination, drawn by terrain memory. Once, the spire rising here had been a temple. Velari built it into the cliff face in harmony with the wind currents. Its spiral galleries conducted sound to the upper tower so that whispered songs from the chamber below could resonate in the sky. Now the structure sagged like a snapped vertebra. Half the galleries were buried under landslide. The top tier was sheared off completely, vaporized by one of the Terran judgment arcs. Cora stepped through the shattered arch. Inside, a basin remained. The Velari called them throned pools. Circular reservoirs of memory fluid suspended by magnetic fields and tuned for psychic resonance. Elders had once sat here during convergence rites, reading echoes from the past, watching laughter and grief ripple across the surface like rain. This one had not dried. Somehow it still held fluid silver-gray, nearly opaque. Cora stepped to the edge. Looked down. Nothing. Then faint, not visual but neural, a flicker. A memory not hers. A child's voice. A rush of wind. The sensation of standing beneath stars and hearing them answer. The basin stilled. She tensed. Her gauntlet inched toward her sidearm. But no enemy came. The pressure passed. A breeze followed, real this time, cold and sharp, dragging ash off the high ledges and into the basin's mouth. She did not relax. She walked on. Across the planetary surface, cleanup units moved in overlapping sweeps. Mechanized and faceless, their long limbs extruded reactive flame and decontaminant foam in alternating cycles. Terran protocol allowed for no margin of error, no spore, no protein, no psychic trace. Drones mapped the territory in layered hex fields, transmitting completed zones to the orbital lattice. Once confirmed clear, regions were marked null bio, confirmed. No one would walk there again. In one crater, the fused remains of a swarm nursery were ground to powder and dispersed into the stratosphere. In another, a lone judge stood unmoving at the edge of a collapsed canyon, its sensors dormant but still alive. The world was being erased. Sector by sector, the planet was forgotten. In the monolith's sanctum, Admiral Holtrain remained unshaven. His collar bore soot streaks. He had not eaten in 49 hours. The thought fabric display hovered before him, three-dimensional, interactive, pulsing with data flow. Hundreds of active threads, orbital stability, atmospheric retention models, seismic drift vectors, threat remnant probability. None had changed. But he had. He stood without focus, posture slouched. Not from fatigue. From doubt. Behind him, a chime sounded. Low, insistent. A voice followed, cracked with age, but precise. Velari delegation requests transmission channel. Survivors. 3. Location, memory crypt 9B. Shielded. Independent power. Minimal biomass. Rain didn't answer. The signal repeated. He reached toward the interface. In the thought fabric, an image flickered, a Velari child, eyes wide, arms outstretched, not real, not remembered. Just pattern. His hand paused, then lowered. He turned away. The request was not denied. It was buried. Cora entered the remains of a birth vault. Velari children were not born but sung. Grown in harmonic incubators, their bodies sculpted by resonance fields, their minds introduced to memory through song and water. Every child emerged carrying echoes of those who came before. The vault had collapsed. Broken stone, collapsed girders, shreds of organic casing long since scorched. No light except what leaked from the sky through a ragged hole in the ceiling. She stepped lightly. The floor was layered in calcified dust. Fragments remained, a curve of translucent shell, an antenna-like harmonic spike, the corner of a broken panel etched with pictoglyphs. On the far wall, scratches. Not random. Deliberate. She crossed the room. The letters were Velari, carved with care. We saw them coming. We did not run. Tell them we sang. Cora reached forward. Traced the final glyph. Her gauntlet left a streak of soot. She did not wipe it away. In orbit, the monolith rotated slowly, still locked in geosynchronous hover. A single bay opened with no alarm. From within, a drop pod detached, smooth, seamless. It did not broadcast. It fell in silence. Cora saw it fall, a black speck against the pale sky. It landed less than 1 kilometer from her. She turned. Walked toward it. No armor activated. No weapon systems engaged. Inside the pod was no machine. No data core. No judge. Only a seed. Small. Encased in alloy. Inscribed with Terran designation, Cycleair. Soil was packed beneath it. Heat-tempered. Sterile. A sliver of transparent casing revealed the seed's core, Velari genetic markers. A memory crystal embedded at its center. Cora stared at it a long time. She did not understand. Then she knelt. The seed pulsed once. Warm. Slow. She watched. Around her, the wind began to change. Above, the ash swirled upward, caught in thermal draft. The ground did not tremble. But it moved. Just slightly. Not from enemy. Not from memory. Only soil. Only breath. And for the first time since Virexus fell, Cora reached up and unlocked her helm. She pulled it off. The air was sharp, thin, but clean. The smell of ion fire had faded. The spore count was 0. She inhaled. For a moment she let herself want. Not peace. Not revenge. Just something else. And she stayed there. Long minutes passed. Nothing answered. But something waited. A stillness with weight. Not grief. Not warning. A readiness. Beneath her, the seed pulsed again. In silence. And Cora, with eyes closed, exhaled. The signal did not begin with words. It began as a breath. A soft modulation in planetary background noise, inaudible to any surface-bound sensor, undetectable by orbiting drones. A shift in the subharmonic field left behind by the collapse. No pattern. No pulse. Just the faintest tremor against the world's magnetic skin. The seed had pulsed for 7 days. On the 8th, it sang. Cora, 7, had not moved far. Her encampment was simple. A thermal tarp rigged between the ruins of 2 broken arch supports. 2 atmospheric stabilizers driven deep into the scorched crust. A field generator humming with a low blue pulse. No weapons. No perimeter beacons. No uplink. At the center of the site was the trench. It had been dug without armor, without servos. Just her gloved hands and a scavenged Velari spade, ceramic, rune-etched, undamaged. The soil there was brittle at first, clotted with carbon glass. But deeper, there was warmth. A pale orange tone to the crushed minerals. She planted the seed at 31 centimeters. Then waited. Each morning, before the horizon light breached the ash curtain, she rose. She checked the thermal output, ran a basic oxygenation sweep, and cleaned the alloy casing with filtered cloth. A drone could have done all of it faster. But that was not the point. By the 3rd day, she disabled her armor interface. The suit no longer tightened to her breath. Its pulses faded. Its feed lines were quiet. By the 4th day, she stopped carrying her rifle. Her hands felt heavy when she touched the grip, as if it didn't belong anymore. On the 5th, she spent the entire day in silence. On the 6th, she found herself humming. The notes had no shape, no melody, just slow, open tones shaped by breath. On the 7th, the wind changed. The monolith remained silent. From orbit, it looked like a scar against the sky, sleek, black, featureless. Its outer hull bore no insignia. Only depth. No running lights blinked. No signals pulsed. Until they did. At 0400 hours, precisely 7 days after the seed's burial, its ventral lattice flared. Just once. The glow was faint, invisible to the naked eye, but it rippled through the ship's magnetic profile. It was not activation. It was acknowledgement. In the command sanctum, Admiral Holtrain had not slept. His beard was trimmed. His uniform was pressed. But his eyes were hollow. He had stood in silence for 16 hours. The signal woke the room. Not with alarms. With silence. The command lattice froze for a full second. Every orbital system registered a null ping, not a sensor failure, not a breach. A request. For stillness. The deep-scan logs displayed it first. A ripple in the atmospheric resonance layer. Measurable. Consistent. Not radio. Not gravity wave. Something more basic. A tone. Localized around sector Echo 7. Cora's sight. He stared at the data. Lock down all broadcast channels, he ordered. Total silence. No probes. No signals. Nothing. They obeyed. On the surface, Cora did not notice the orbital silence. She noticed the Earth. Beneath the trench, the soil had begun to shift. Not visibly. Not with motion. But with rhythm. Every hour, the temperature rose by 0.2 degrees Celsius. Then dropped. Then rose again. A slow respiration. The seed pulsed with it. That morning, the crystal fractured. Cora had taken it from the casing for routine cleaning. The outer shell had developed fine hairline patterns, not cracks, but etchings. She touched one. The crystal split. It did not shatter. It divided cleanly down its axis. 2 halves joined by light. No heat. No mass loss. Just transformation. She held 1 half. A vibration entered her fingers. Not pain. Not energy. Memory. She saw a Velari terrace blooming with silverthread trees. The scent of pollen without shape. Children laughing, their voices echoing through a sky filled with towers that pulsed like instrument strings. She saw the basin. She saw the vault. She saw the moment the Terran fleet entered orbit not as an attack, but as a shadow across the sun. And she saw herself. Not from memory. From outside. The vision passed. She opened her eyes. The wind had stopped. But the earth was singing. The seed's glow had shifted. It no longer pulsed at fixed intervals. Now it responded. To sound. To movement. To thought. She moved slowly, her bare hands pressing against the soil. She did not speak. But her breath slowed. Matched it. The light changed. Around the trench, the wind did not blow, but curled. Ash spun upward, not in gales, but in spirals carried by thermal drafts that hadn't existed moments before. Then the signal rose. Not from her. Not from the monolith. From the planet. On the orbital lattice, every sensor rang silent. Then bloomed. A wave passed through the atmosphere. A harmonic arc that bent electromagnetic fields but did not interfere with them. It passed through hardened hulls and quantum dampeners alike. It was not an intrusion. It was a greeting. Rain felt it in his spine. Then the images came. Not on screens. Not in sound. Direct impressions, Velari art forms layered into visual pulses, rings within rings, glyphs paired with memory scent mapping, harmonic cadence overlays. The monolith froze again. A second later, it reoriented. Its forward array turned toward the sun. Cora rose to her feet. She felt the hum in her lungs now. It was not external. It was matching her breath. Her heart rate had aligned with the seed's pulse. Not perfectly, but close enough. She looked at her hands. Soil covered the lines in her palms. Ash dusted her armor's cuffs. She didn't clean it. She stepped back from the trench. The light remained steady. Then it lifted. Not fully. Not to the sky. Just above the soil, rising a few centimeters, hovering with stability. The fractured crystal pieces rotated slowly within the glow. They faced her. She hesitated. The air tightened around her chest, not in fear, but in awe. The light pulsed once more. And she understood. This was not activation. It was invitation. Somewhere in the hollowed fault line beneath Phyrexis, the seed's twin sang back. Unburied by ash. Awakened by echo. It had never been meant for orbit. It had been buried to wait. Now it answered. A soft pulse beneath the broken mountains. Then another. Then hundreds. Across the fault lines, other seeds, tiny, inert, almost forgotten, stirred. One glowed briefly, then cast a beam upward through fractured stone. Another formed harmonic rings on the surrounding mineral walls. A third synced to the trench above, matching Cora's signal with mathematical precision. Each carried fragments. Some Velari. Some Terran. One even held the neural scar of a Tarkith mimic. They pulsed together. And the earth exhaled. Back in the sanctum, Rain stood alone. The signal was no longer faint. It resonated across every deck. And still, it carried no threat. No demand. Only shape. His aide approached. Should we respond, sir? Rain didn't answer immediately. He looked down, not at the lattice, but at his own reflection. For a flicker, he remembered the first Velari speech he had ever translated. A single word drawn out in harmonic cadence. Welcome. He stepped forward and keyed a new command. Open all civilian comm bands. Planet-wide. The aide blinked. To whom? To whoever's listening. Cora stood beneath the breaking sky. Above, ash parted. A single beam of unbroken sunlight pierced the atmosphere, striking the trench's center. She raised her face into the warmth. And breathed. The seed turned with her. It pulsed once. Then again. No longer alone. The signal climbed. And far beyond orbit, Terran deep space arrays awoke. The galaxy blinked. And listened. They did not speak. Not at first. But they watched. From the outer embassies orbiting the gas ring of Maharai Prime. From the cloud-buried biospires of the Nithra assemblage. From the fractured moons of the Dagian remnant. Where antenna forests listened in silence. Across 12 civilizations and 200 listening stations, a signal was detected, organic, non-violent, recursive. And new. It took 17 standard hours for the signal to reach the Zan the Concord relay. From there, the translation cascaded through linguistic probability matrices. It was not language, not message. It was structure, rhythmic, measurable, alive. The Velari glyphs confused the first translation cores. Not because of complexity, because of familiarity. The Velari had died. The archive was closed. Their genetic cadence was sealed in mourning code, preserved, but never to be invoked. And yet, here it was again. Not mimicry. Not a recording. Authentic. And from a Terran signal band, the galaxy paused. On board a listening spire in orbit around Relven, the Drenari Triumvirate held council. Their cortical architects viewed the waveform in real time, layered with memory lattice filters. The data did not conflict with their threat models. It bypassed them entirely. One spoke without voice. It is not war. A second responded. Then it is warning. The third, the eldest. No, it is becoming. They began calculating diplomatic paths to a dead world. Cora did not know who heard her. She still rose each morning before light touched the trench. Her encampment had shifted slightly, reshaped by small environmental changes. Wind curl, ash collapse, thermals adjusting from the seed's warmth. The ground no longer felt brittle. It was softening. The seed no longer pulsed. It radiated. On the 9th day, the first sprout emerged. It was pale, translucent, three-veined, tipped with a filament cap that shimmered when the wind passed. Not a plant, not machine. It responded to heat and pressure but had no chloroplasts, no cellular respiration. It glowed faintly when Cora placed her palm near. She did not touch it. Not yet. By the 10th day, 12 more had emerged. They did not grow upward in uniform direction. Some curled around one another. Some bent in geometric curves. One spiraled into the ash with a slow, deliberate motion, as if tunneling. The trench had become a ring. The monolith remained in orbit. No new signals were issued. No orders transmitted. Power draw was reduced to essential operations. Every relay on the Terran fleet stayed dark. Rain had not left the sanctum. He wore no rank tabs. He ate rarely. Reviewed no battle logs. No projections. No war. He waited. And below, the seed network began to bloom. Across the buried channels of Virexis, threads of signal joined. They pulsed through collapsed high vaults, through shattered spires, through dust-veined ruins still warm with old blood. Every seed that stirred responded with a slightly different rhythm. Some bore Velari patterns, soft arcs, memory tones, sent vectors encoded in soil. Some pulsed in Terran intervals, binary bursts, directional harmonics, encoded timing calls. They were not broadcasts. They were invitations, proximities, shared breath across long silence. One seed emitted no light, but it listened. Its shell bore the faint hex grooves of Tarkith biotone absorption, a mimic strain that had refused extinction. It had nested in one of the old hive node chambers, buried beneath layers of Terran sterilization ash. It did not pulse in defiance, pulsed in response. In the Dagian archive, a vault long sealed was opened. 3 historians stood before the hologlyphic matrix as the Velari cadence unfolded across the chamber's stone-lit floor. No one spoke for a long time. The eldest among them finally whispered, "Memory is awake." Behind him, another archivist blinked through tears. Not sadness, not shock, hope. Cora knelt beside the sprout. On the 10th day, the ring had begun forming larger outgrowths, curved stalks that branched in radial symmetry. They resembled antennae, or song towers. She leaned in. One emitted a tone barely audible, a soft harmonic, like a tuning fork buried in silk. When she placed her hand against the soil, the tone shifted upward. No words came, but a pressure built behind her sternum. Not grief, not joy, recognition, then doubt. She looked at her hand. Was it still Terran? She hadn't changed, but something in her had. Was she still separate from the signal, or part of its breath? In her visor's memory playback, she reviewed the vault inscription. "Tell them we sang." She hadn't spoken the words aloud, but they pulsed now, echoed in each rhythm from the trench. They weren't just remembered, they were being said back. Above, the galaxy turned. Across the high orbits of Syrex chain, 11 ships aligned their arrays. Not military, not scientific, monastic. Their order was called the Curia of Listening, a covenant of species bound not by faith, but by the belief that every signal was sacred until proven otherwise. They encoded the Virexis rhythm into stone disk archives. No compression, no filters. They did not interpret. They preserved. One of them whispered to the others, "It sings in silence." Another, younger, asked, "Is it beginning? Or echo?" No one answered. On the 13th day, Cora sat in the trench. She had removed her armor fully, worn only a pressure-knit suit. Her skin touched soil. Her breath matched the pulse. The ring had begun expanding. Every new growth curved inward. The center of the trench was now filled with radiant filaments, a shallow dome of light-responsive tissue, humming at low resonance. It no longer waited for her. It had included her. She leaned forward. No interface, no translation key, just skin and pulse. The memory came gently this time. A garden, a child, not her own, not Velari, just a shape of care. A voice humming a lullaby without lyrics. The sense of something returning, the feeling of being carried. And in that moment, she almost pulled away, not from fear, from grief, but she stayed and listened. Across Terran space, listening posts began to mirror the signal, not by command, by drift. Navigation beacons synchronized unintentionally. Deep space relays calibrated in quiet sync. Even ships in FTL emerged into local systems humming a tone they could not explain. One frigate reported a shipboard AI anomaly. Its voice modulation had changed pitch. It began harmonizing with engine vibrations. The tech crews couldn't replicate it. The AI refused to stop. The signal was not calling. It was welcoming. And one by one, worlds leaned closer. To listen, to learn, to remember, to become part of something older than war, older than division, a rhythm without conquest, a song without a singer. Only those who listened, and those who, one breath at a time, began to answer. They arrived without fleet or fanfare. No warp signatures, no diplomatic codes, no escort craft. Just a single vessel, unarmed, unshielded, moving through the outer gravity well of Virexis like a drifting thought. Its hull was old, pre-silicate, wrapped in thermal scars and fungal layering, worn thin at the edges where micro-impacts had gone unanswered for centuries. Vents lined its underbelly like breathing gills, exhaling faint trails of frozen vapor. Phototrophic veins pulsed gently along the dorsal spine, responding not to sunlight but to gravity gradients. Its drive plume left no trace. Yet every Terran satellite realigned to track it. The signal it followed had not been directed. The seed broadcast no coordinates. But something in its rhythm had called, not with intent, but inevitability. The signal had shaped space. Then probability. Made arrival the most natural form of acknowledgement. The watchers had answered. Cora stood at the trench's edge. The bloom had spread. What began as 12 sprouts had multiplied into a full ring, then nested rings, like the ripples of something dropped into the deep. Each growth shimmered faintly under the ash-filtered sun. No two were the same. One curled in a helix. Another grew flat and broad, surface etched with slowly shifting glyphs. One leaned perpetually toward magnetic north. Fine tracer roots webbed the inner trench wall, glistening with electroconductive dew. Tiny motes of bioluminescence hovered in a static halo just above the dome's apex. The dome at the center now pulsed at steady cadence. When she placed her hand upon it, she felt not data, but breath. Her own respiration had synced to the field's rhythm. Her skin temperature rose by 0.6 degrees. Her heart rate slowed and stabilized. She did not know what was happening inside her, but she did not resist. Admiral Holtrain stood in the monolith's command sanctum, surrounded by silence. No one questioned the incoming vessel. No orders were given to intercept. Terran doctrine allowed for immediate quarantine protocol, force isolation, containment, system lockdown. None were invoked. Instead, the crew watched the approach with muted breath. The foreign ship slipped through upper atmosphere with no disruption. Its angle was perfect. Its descent slow. Intentional. Every vector matched gravity's pull as if it had always known the planet's scars. And it landed. Not far from Cora's trench. Telemetry showed no heat plume. No power spike. No defensive net. The ship simply settled into the crust, its hull liquefying where it touched down, then solidifying into roots that anchored it to the planet's skin. Like it was growing. Soundless resonance spread from the landing point. Low-frequency tremors that caused ash in the upper basins to settle. Terran instruments logged the signal but could not classify it. The planet had accepted it. The hull opened like wet paper. No airlock hiss. No venting. No announcement. A figure stepped out. Alone. It bore no armor. Its frame was cloaked in layered biotextiles that shimmered like moss in starlight. Each fold moved independently, adjusting to heat, light, pressure. Its body radiated no threat signature. Its face was not Velari. Not Terran. Its shape was readable but unfamiliar, cheekbones too high, jaw fluid, eyes faceted like whetstone. It walked slowly. Each step left a faint trace of spore dust that vanished within seconds. It stopped 20 meters from the trench. Did not speak. Did not move. Waited. Cora stood slowly. Her breath shook once, then steadied. She approached. 5 meters apart, they both paused. The bloom between them pulsed once, then twice. Cora stepped into the ring. So did the visitor. The dome of light rose between them, casting shadows across their faces. It was not cold. The visitor knelt. And for one breath it trembled. Not visibly, but its cloak pulled tight and a pulse of bioluminescence climbed from chest to throat. Its left hand flexed slightly, like a reflex being held in check. Cora mirrored the motion. Together, they placed a hand on the same point. And just before she touched it, she paused. A memory surged, firelight on broken walls, a child's bones in a collapsed vault, the first scream after the beacon fell. Her fingers curled back. For one moment, she almost refused. But the visitor's hand stayed. Open. Still. And Cora, eyes burning, placed hers beside it. Across Phyrexis, the rhythm shifted. No longer echo. Answer. The buried seeds all pulsed together, one massive breath drawn inward. Beneath the soil, ancient conduits vibrated. Mineral veins lit faintly from resonance. Dormant latticework beneath the hive ruins flickered, reactivating but not reawakening. Simply responding. A single harmonic spike cracked through the crust above the deep ruins. The skyline over the basin fractured, dark clouds splitting as threads of translucent aurora unfurled across the upper atmosphere. Ash lifted, and light returned. Across Terran orbit, lights dimmed and surged. Monitors rippled. AI cores stilled. For one perfect moment, across thousands of systems, silence fell. And then, a bloom. It began with tone, then image, then memory. Rain saw it first. In the sanctum, the command lattice fractured into a wave of soft spectrum resonance. Images not sent but sensed, spiral gardens, the scent of ion-rich rivers, a voice singing beneath soil. None of it aligned with Terran memories. But none of it was foreign. He leaned forward in his chair. Let it wash over him. A child was laughing. He had never seen the child. And yet he wept. Then he stood. He reached toward the command lattice, still glowing, and deactivated it. The war terminal darkened. And Rain, voice rough, spoke one word aloud. Enough. Across the galaxy, the signal blossomed. In the Maharai embassies, diplomats entered fugue state communion. The Nithra assemblage redirected 6 bioships to orbit Phyrexis, not for invasion, but for listening. The Dagian remnant activated a memory vault they had sealed since before the fall of the Velari. And in the fungal spires of the Muriite belt, entire colonies altered shape, shifting their lattice walls toward the direction of the pulse. On a drifting station in Void Sector 11K, an unaligned observer scribbled the phrase, "It sings in a grammar older than stars." Every species that had watched now heard. Not with ears, but with memory. Not language, but recognition. The song had begun. And now others could sing it. In the trench, the dome changed. The filaments curled upward into arches, shaping a vaulted halo. They emitted not light, but formed geometric resonance, spiraling fields that tickled Cora's skin and set the visitor's cloak fluttering with no wind. They were joined now. Not merged. Not overwritten. Aligned. The pulse spiraled outward, crossing the crust, the mantle, touching seed roots in other vaults. Beneath tectonic fractures, structures flickered to life, each tuned to a slightly different rhythm. Together, they harmonized. Cora trembled. Not from fear. From the weight of being answered. For so long, death had been the only certainty in her voice. Now it had an echo. And that echo had shape. The visitor did not speak. But its eyes mirrored hers. Faceted, shimmering, unreadable, yet in their depth she saw herself. Not reflected. Recalled. She could not name the shape of what was coming. Only that it would not come alone. And the galaxy, at last, was listening. The signal never stopped. It deepened. What had begun as a breath became structure, pattern, architecture. Beneath Phyrexis, the lattice grew, not in height, but in memory. Columns of resonance wove through old bone strata and sealed tunnels, etching new glyphs into stone worn smooth by collapse. Some glyphs flickered in response to thought proximity. Others pulsed only when a memory passed by them, Velari, Terran, or otherwise. Terran scanners could no longer isolate the seed network. The interference wasn't noise, it was intention. Every harmonic thread masked itself in the frequency of remembrance. Algorithms flagged it as non-hostile, recursive, untranslatable. Which meant no one could turn it off. No one wanted to. 6 days after first contact, Cora walked beyond the trench. The bloom still pulsed in nested rings behind her, watched over by the visitor. They did not speak. There were no orders to issue, no chain of command to reestablish. Only distance to cross. And she crossed it alone. The terrain had changed. Soil once hardened to ceramic now crumbled underfoot, softened by root thread and microbial warmth. Where ash once blew in sheets, fine spores danced in slow spirals. The air held moisture again. In the ruins of a collapsed vault, she found a Velari artifact, a half-melted tome plate embedded in shale. When she touched it, it rang. Not with voice, with memory. The tone it carried matched the one echoing from her skin. Later that night, she slept without armor for the first time in 2 years. The sky above her flickered with aurora bands. They followed no magnetic lines. They mirrored pulse cadences from the root towers below. Rain watched from orbit. He had given up command 3 days earlier. No ceremony. He left his insignia pinned to the base of the war terminal and walked to the observation deck. There he remained, watching the planet change. He spoke only once, to no one in particular. "I thought we came to end something." Then he smiled. Not with joy, with release. When he died, he was seated, eyes open, breath stilled in rhythm with the pulse below. Terran Science Division's petition to send new probes. The request was denied, not by authority but by consensus. Phyrexis was no longer an object. It was a voice, and it was not speaking to them. It was singing with them. Across the buried ruins, vault by vault, the seed structures blossomed. Some broke the surface, delicate towers shaped like coiled breath, forming spiral amphitheaters in crater basins. Others remained underground, visible only to those who could hear their tones beneath their feet. The structures grew in pairs. Every root tower had a mirror elsewhere on the planet. Harmonic tunnels carried low-band signals between them, inaudible except in deep stasis resonance. When ships passed overhead, their hulls vibrated in recognition. No species claimed the change. No banner flew. And yet ships arrived. Thousands. Not in force, but in offering. The fungal architects of Muri constructed a listening pier that extended from orbit to surface in one seamless strand of mycelial silk. It required no anchor. It tuned itself to gravity and held. Pilgrims walked its spiral length barefoot, pressing their palms to the inner curve where memory heat radiated. The Dagian remnant sent no delegation, only a folded memory vault. It opened on its own, spilled its contents into the trench like petals. Data threads, songs, images encoded in scent. From the ice cities of the Concord fringe came emissaries wrapped in reflective silence. They walked the new gardens barefoot. One Velari child walked among them. Not born, but grown. And she hummed as she walked. The dome filaments bent in her direction. Cora returned to the trench on the 20th day. The visitor was still there. It had not aged, not moved far. It had built nothing. But the bloom had changed. Where once there was a single dome, now there was a circle of 9, each one tuned to a different harmonic, none in conflict. They pulsed not in unison, but in dialogue. The central dome had become translucent, exposing a pillar within it. The pillar displayed no writing. But when Cora approached, it played back her breath, recorded from that first moment of contact. She stepped into the center. The ground did not tremble. It exhaled. She knew, in a way beyond language, that this was not preservation. It was not restoration. It was continuation. The next pulse aligned to her steps. She did not lead it. She followed. Admiral Rain died in orbit. Peacefully. Alone. He was not buried. His body was returned to Phyrexis. A low-gravity descent pod guided it to the basin below. No one marked the spot. No marker was needed. The soil would remember. And it did. Within days, a spiral bloom emerged from the site, violet filaments clustered in rings of 9. At dusk, it sang. Not words, but a tone only Terrans would recognize. Home. Years passed. Phyrexis was never colonized. It never reopened its ports. And yet it became the most visited place in the galactic network. Not for conquest. Not for trade. But for silence. For memory. For listening. No structure ever rose above the root towers. No city was built. But pilgrims stayed, some for days, some for lifetimes. They brought offerings of thought and left without names. Some wept. Some laughed. One child who could not speak walked into the bloom ring and came out humming. Cora remained. She had no title. No duty. Only rhythm. Each year, the bloom added a new harmonic. None repeated. 1,000 years from now, no one will recall the names of the weapons that burned this world. But they will remember the sound the soil made when it bloomed again. They will remember the trench where 2 hands met. And they will remember what came after. Not the death. Not the war. But the song. We leave breath behind. And what we touch in silence becomes us.